going from all over, actually, Florida, Los Angeles, Peru. We got people from all over the world on this webinar. So we don't want to make anyone nervous, which will be cool. All right, it is 7 o'clock, top of the hour. We want to get started with 8 elements of supply chain intelligence with myself, Randy Malden, and Howard Knapp. Say hello, Howard.
Hey, everyone.
And we're going to get started and let everyone know we are broadcasting this live to YouTube so other people can watch this once we are done. And just to get started, we want to make sure that we thank our sponsor, supplychainmanagement.jobs. It's a place where you can not only post jobs for your company, but if you are a candidate or someone looking for a job, this is a great place to go. Post your resume and find jobs specifically in the supply chain management career field. Those are our sponsors this evening. So make sure you visit those folks so that they can, benefit from sponsoring this webinar. Now, why are you here? Basically what we want to do is prepare for supply chain disruptions. We had a lot with the pandemic, and after the pandemic, and as we go into the recession, as the media is starting to talk about a recession, we're starting to, a lot of us knew about it about 6 months ago and start talking about it and preparing. And now we want to bring it to the forefront. And why do we need to know this is that we want to be able to respond instead of react. If you're starting to think about things now that people are talking about it, you're too late. And what will you get from tonight's webinar? We're going to talk about the state of supply chain, why this is important, and why you need to start doing supply chain intelligence, which is a part of a bigger picture. We talk about supply chain resilience, but this is the very fundamentals of it all. You're going to better understand how to anticipate supply chain disruptions, shift from a reactive, putting out fires, to a responsive plan to supply chain crisis, strengthen your supply chain resilience, and improve your reliability throughout your supply chain, not only for your customers, but with your suppliers as well. Now, why is this important? Well, as you know, the cost of hamburgers has gone up. And when the price of hamburgers goes up, people get concerned. So we grabbed this graphic a little bit earlier, and it's actually showing the impact of how prices are actually changing for just the basic commodities. And hamburgers are a great way to illustrate that. As you can see, the price of bacon, which is one of my favorites, is 17.7% going up, which you're talking about a buck, it can be expensive, but it can add up, and that rolls down the supply chain to the restaurateurs and other things. COVID actually had negative impacts in our supply chain. Specifically, we saw delays in the cross-border transportation. We saw the inability to grab critical supplies, and we saw key absences within our supply chain staff. So we're going to talk about all those things this evening so you can better get a hold of those things. What kind of supply chain disruptions have you experienced? Congestions at the port. Not only are we experiencing, we're going to talk about politics a little bit here. Infrastructure is another thing we're going to talk about a little bit later. Sourcing transportation, moving things goes into transportation as well, and just making sure you got the stuff you need to deliver for your customers. Very, very important. Challenges people are experiencing, disruptions in our supply chain, hiring qualified workers, and we're going to talk about towards the end how to find the exact kind of person you need to fill those gaps in your supply chain team. And that way you can respond faster to your customers. What are our top priorities? Now, Howard, this is where I want to bring you into the conversation. Being in industry right now, being someone who is doing this job day in, day out, and looking at these top priorities in supply chain operations, what are some of the things that stand out to you?
Yeah, definitely trying to make sure that we get our stuff when we say we're going to get it. And that's a big challenge right now with post-COVID world and everything going on crazy, political, military-wise. That's definitely the biggest challenge right now, trying to make sure that we can continue to get our stuff when we need it. How about resilient supply chain?
Resilience, that's something that, something to start, people are really starting to talk about now, resilient supply chain. And this will be our agenda this evening. We're going to go over the 5 steps to building an intelligent system, the 8 elements of the supply chain intelligence network, the key pieces of information you need to tap into, the pillars of the framework on which you're going to build your system, and then get that piece of information coming into you. And then towards the end, actually talk about how to hire the right person for your supply chain intelligence positions. And we've got a few follow-on opportunities after this, which we have more webinars. This is one of a series that we're doing free to everyone that wants to attend, as well as we have a workshop anticipated for next year, and a couple of other things that we want to make sure that you are aware of as we get towards the end of this webinar. My experience, my background, I was in the Marine Corps for 20 years, came out in 2010, and since then have been working in the training industry, consulting industry, in supply chain specifically because I did logistics and supply chain management in the Marine Corps in operations in austere environments around the world. And so it gets a little bit different when you're in the middle of nowhere and you need stuff. You really want to make sure your supply chain is working. And since then, I've been, again, consulting and just learning more about supply chain from the industry perspective and how people can use the things we learned in the military and bring it into industry. Howard, tell us a little bit about you.
Hey everyone, Howard Knapp. So I started my journey, supply chain journey in the Army as a logistics Army officer and graduated with a supply chain management degree, War Eagle, from Auburn University. Then I also recently got my CPSM certification, which means Certified Professional in Supply Management, where I actually met Randy. It's a professional certification. Then I've been about in the aerospace manufacturing for 10 years now, served in multiple roles from inventory control supervisor, operations supervisor, and planner buyer, which I'm currently at in a company called Moog. I served in multiple leadership capacities in the Army, National Guard, from battalion logistics officer, company commander, and brigade logistics officer. So my military background has allowed me to have a deep, unique understanding of supply chain resilience and the geopolitical risks that are involved.
And so you really have a background both in industry and in the military, both at the same time. Not only are you using it in the National Guard, and we'll talk about that, how you use logistics in wildfires and responding to crises inside the civilian sector, and then your industry experience as well, responding to crisis within an industry supply chain as well. And just bringing those two pictures together is a unique experience for an individual to have. So it's very good to have your experience on this webinar to share with us supply chain intelligence and how to build these networks. Now, a few housekeeping tips for our folks that are joining us is, if you want to ask a question, just click down at the bottom. You'll see a big question mark, and that's where the questions and answers are there. And the reason we use that is because these get there, they load up, and they don't get pushed down like a chat would. If you're having a chat and people are commenting back and forth and doing that, your question can get pushed down. So we use the question and answer, as well as if you like something or you find something funny, we have this react to something button right here, and you can kind of grab some emojis there. Let me grab one, just to kind of show how it works. As you can see, the thumb goes up. It kind of lets us know that we're talking good things and you like what we're talking about, or you find it interesting, or you have other things. Just a way to interact and share your experience on this webinar with others and let them know. So if we're doing good things, give us a thumbs up. If we're doing funny things, laugh at us. Don't laugh at Howard too much, as well as, if we're saying some pretty good things, note those as well, because we'll be able to take all this. And then towards the end, again, if you have any questions, just load those up. And at the very end, after we go through the formal presentation, we may be up for time, and anyone who wants to stay for questions and answers can stay, and everyone else that needs to go on can go on. And then we'll post and replay all the questions and answers so you can see those for yourself. All right, very good. All right, so let's talk about a supply chain intelligence system. Now, I like systems because systems are a process. They're repeatable. There's something you can do again and again and get better at every time you do it, versus something you get lucky at doing and then you're like, now how do I do that again? So we want to build a system for our supply chain intelligence process. And there are 5 steps: create, add, connect, create, and make. And let's talk about those. You want to create goals, KPIs, the models, and the analysis. You want to kind of build that out. What are your goals? And we're going to talk about that. We talk about structure, and we're going to talk about KPIs. What specific pieces of information do you need to collect for your supply chain? And Howard, very keen on understanding those key pieces of information. Your models, how do they affect each part of your supply chain? And then how do you analyze things? Why would you want to analyze things the same way every time? Because you can test your analysis. Is it working? I've put out there that the economy before the pandemic is much different now after the pandemic. So any models you had going on, you definitely have to be testing those and making sure that they're working still or changing and shifting to the new economy. and then adding new KPIs and identifying the cause and effects of changes within those KPIs, key performance indicators, statistics, things that you collect. Now, Howard, when you think about things that you pay attention to in industry, what are some of the key KPIs that you're focused on?
Always is on-time delivery, and that's a major one right now, right? The big challenge trying to get stuff in on time when we say we need it. We also have purchase price variance, which measures the difference between the price previously paid versus the price now, which is also a challenge right now with the increase in pricing. And then also order signal aging. Basically, how long does it take to convert a purchase requisition or requirement into an actual purchase order?
And that's important. We'll talk about that when we talk about the structure, the pillars, and that's talking about internal processes. So the time on those things is key, especially in a crisis scenario. So then you want to connect your KPIs, your key pieces of information, to the sources where you collect that information and connect those together. Whether you have an ERP system, an MRP system, Excel spreadsheets for some folks that may be out there, lots of different tools out there. So you got to have the KPIs, the information you need, and then find sources to feed information into those KPIs. Howard, what are some of the systems that you guys use to connect your KPIs to your sources?
We have definitely ERP systems. We use SAP, starting to use it at Moog now. Interesting system to tie in how our performance is and use that to a computer system to make sure that we're tracking how we're doing. Another thing we really pay attention to with KPIs though is how are we serving our internal customers and our stakeholders? Being in procurement on my side and supply chain, and being in manufacturing and aerospace, how are we serving our customer, who is the production floor? How are we making sure that our parts are on time? Is it to what they need so that we can ultimately get out to our customer on time?
On time delivery every time. And as we create those KPIs, we have to create decision points. Decision points are when we're going to make decisions. And especially in this world of information overload, constant information, we can never have too much information. Sooner or later, we have to make a decision. So you have to find out when are you going to pull the trigger on a decision, make a decision so you can actually take action to get something done. And the whole point here is to stay ahead of your competition. The time it takes to make a decision needs to be relatively faster than your competition, meaning other people in your industry. I mean, if it takes 30 days to make a decision and you can make a decision in 25, you are relatively faster than your competition. But the only way to do that is to identify what those decision points are, collect the information to make those decisions, and then actually execute on making those decisions, and then actually make your decisions. We've talked a lot about industry, but I want to kind of bring it down to an example of something I'm going through personal, because we all have our own personal supply chain, the same process. Like college applications, collecting information, just to kind of walk through this. KPIs, what are my kids' education goals? What is the budget that I have for college? Where are the schools located and what kind of grade or education can they get at those different schools? So those are the information points I need. So I have to go find sources and make sure that those KPIs line up with my kids' interest as well as what's available for them in the marketplace, and identify cause and effect. If my kids don't get really good SAT scores, they're not going to go to some schools, as well as if they do really, really well, then they could get opportunities at other schools. Then we connect those sources of information with the KPIs, bank accounts, 529 plans, those type of things. Start to connect the KPIs, information in the schools, U.S. News report on colleges, make sure that they make sense. Then we come to a decision point. All decisions have to be made by May, so you can get people committed to the school, right? So they can take action, as well as other people can be released so they can find other places and other schools. And then we actually will make a decision based on that. The reason I share that example is I want to just kind of tie in how we have our regular supply chain, regular process that we do this every day. So, with a big supply chain and industry, it can be very complicated sometimes. So I just want to kind of bring it down to an elementary level that we understand on a daily basis. And then we can start to apply it to a bigger picture, because the next step is taking action. So what I'd like for you to think about is, do you see parts of a supply chain intelligence process in your daily activities right now? How can you shift information to make better decisions? And most importantly, what can you do in the next 3 days to make a change? Because information is great, but if you don't take action with it, it's not going to do you any good, right? So here we go into the supply chain intelligence framework. These are the pillars you're going to build your system on when you start to identify those KPIs. It starts with an industry framework, unique value proposition, managerial focus, and internal processes. When it comes to an industry framework, Howard, I want to bring you in with your experience in industry where you're at. What's some of the framework? How do you best understand your industry when it comes to the aerospace industry?
Well, for us, it's unique, right? So we're in aerospace manufacturing, like I said, being unique in that area. The thing we really care about for us in aerospace and at our company is quality and high performance for our different airframes. So that's one of our major focuses, is making sure that with the products that we make, that especially going aircraft that have lives on, hundreds of lives on it, is working properly and it's doing what it says, to what we made it to do and what we intended it to do.
Very good. Yeah, got to know how your industry works so that when you get information, you know what it actually means. Now, when it comes to a value proposition, your value proposition in the marketplace is going to drive your decisions on which suppliers you're going to use and what, things you're going to exchange for other things like quality versus cost. So when it comes to your value proposition in the market, Howard, what does it look like for your company?
So going back to that again, right, with being in aerospace, being custom designed. So anything that moves on an aircraft, anything that makes it change directions, which is called motion flow or motion control, that's what Moog specializes in. So it's high quality and high performance. And this goes on a multitude of aircraft. And that's one of our major value propositions, because these are flight critical components, meaning if it fails, an aircraft could fall from the sky or it could crash and hundreds of lives could be lost. So for us, like I said before, our product needs to perform to the specifications it was designed for. And that's what's unique value that we provide at Moog.
And you have like a zero failure rate, right?
Yeah,
Meaning you can't fail. If a plane falls out of the sky, people get hurt, not only in the sky, but on the bottom, wherever that thing lands. So value proposition, high quality, getting it right every single time drives your decision to use one supplier over another. High quality must be there. And that's where it comes to our managerial focus. What your managers tell you to focus on is what's going to drive our decisions as well. If we're trying to reduce cost, we're going to make decisions to reduce cost. A lot of us saw that during the pandemic, where we drove prices down so far that suppliers started dropping out when they couldn't make their margins. They were barely making it in the first place, and now they were having to cut costs and people were dropping out, so they started losing. So managerial focus. What's the managerial focus that you guys have, Howard?
For us, it's quality and capability, and also reliability and consistency, right? We're not focused on driving down costs as much. It's nice to have, but at the end of the day, for our line of work, it needs to make sure that we have good quality, that it's capable of doing what our product is designed for, that we can count on it to do what it's designed to do, and it's consistent.
And so that's driving your decision with suppliers. You're willing to pay a little bit more to meet those other criteria, right?
Exactly.
So cost is not necessarily the most important piece of this part. And just here's an example of a slide that we found, that when CEOs are looking at China, what's going on with China, what's driving their decisions right now is, part of it's looking deeper into their supply chain. Those second, third, fourth, fifth tier suppliers down the road may have a Chinese connection. And so they have to be aware of that. Is it a bottleneck item, something that's not very expensive, but can be critical in actually producing the end result that they're looking for? So these are just some of the things you want to think about. Your CEO's direction, your annual report as a supply chain professional, you need to be aware of what your executives are driving their decisions so you can support those decisions within your supply chain. And that comes down to our internal processes. Howard kind of alluded to that, how long it takes to make a decision when he talks about reducing from procurement request to actually fulfilling that. So what does that look like for you guys, Howard?
Well, so at our site, it's a pretty big site, 700 people at one site, a lot going on at our site in Torrance. But for us, there's multiple levels of decisions, and that's really important for us to consider when it comes to for how long a decision takes. Right? So for us, we have like engineering, quality, and all these different internal stakeholders are affected by something. They have to also sign off on it. So each change, so like supply chain, operations, engineering, and quality, each person has to take their time to study what's going on and make the decision. So this can add up and actually very long lead times for making decisions.
I think time time again relatively faster than your competition. By having a process, you can do it faster. You know what steps you have to take, and you can exercise that process from a regular day-to-day basis to an actual supply chain crisis on speeding up that process. What are the actual critical people that have to make a decision in that process? How long do you think it takes to make a decision, Howard, in your company?
Oh, days. Days or even
Days,
weeks,
days or
depending on
weeks.
the.
That's good. It's not better
Yeah,
than months or years compared to
that's true.
other people who are out there. Months. I've been involved with companies that are like, oh, we have to think about that. We have to wait till our
Mhm.
annual budget, then we'll review that. It's like, well, but the market's moving right now. It's like, well, that's just not how we operate. It's like, okay, that's fine. So action time. Think about building your structure. Consider your supply chain system. What pillars of the supply chain structure do you see inside your organization? What things do you need to add? Do you have good internal processes? Do you understand the managerial focus? Do you understand the value proposition that your company brings to the marketplace? What's a distraction? What are some things that you're paying attention to that just really don't matter? And what changes are you going to make in the next 3 days? And 3 days, why 3 days? Friday, Saturday, Sunday. So Monday, when you come in, you've got changes. You get to add more value to your organization. So think about those. Now we're getting to the 8 elements of supply chain intelligence. This is where Howard gets to bring in his expertise. I've been listening to our rehearsals for the last few weeks, and I'm really excited to share this information with you guys. So Howard, I'm going to turn it over to you and just tell me when to change the slide.
Yeah, got it. Hey guys, so this is the 8 elements of supply chain intelligence, and this is what we call in the military 8 operational variables. So I was thinking I can use this when we use this in the military. We're looking at it from basically how to analyze potential risks in a mission. For example, we're looking at things like what kind of military impacts, kind of political impacts. But this gives us an overall comprehensive analysis of the risks that are involved with the mission. So when you're talking about supply chain resilience, we could really use this to see what kind of impacts your supply chain has on your actual supply chain resilience. So in the military, we would look at these different elements, and we would use this. We would implement this into our mission plans. So there's any kind of risk, we would either plan around it or have something in place to help mitigate those risks. So this is unique to the military, and I thought it would be great to bring it up for supply chain resilience, and I'll explain more in detail. So we're going to look at this from the lens of supply chain resilience.
Now, do you skip any of these steps? Do you make sure you hit every single one of these, even in your industry practice?
Yeah, absolutely. So we look at it all together holistically, and I'll bring that up again later, but you need to look at all 8 of these factors together to make one big decision. You just don't let one thing alter your decision or sway you to go in a certain way because maybe there's some kind of political impacts. You make sure that you use all of them together. And a lot of corporations will only look at it from maybe on-time delivery or cost savings benefit. But there's actually so much more to it when you're considering supply chain resilience. Next slide. So here's a good one, right? Political. This is such a major topic of discussion lately, domestically and internationally, with everything, the way things are going. And this looks at how the political policies and overall political environment in a given area or country, and how that can impact the operations of your supply chain. So maybe some of you haven't noticed, but this last week, there's big news about semiconductors, especially in China. The Biden administration put in place strict export controls or restrictions regarding both the selling of semiconductors, the tooling involved with semiconductors, and even the talent. So they gave an ultimatum to American citizens that are working in the semiconductor industry in China. They said you can either stay in China, work in the semiconductor field, or lose your citizenship. So all of them came back, and can you blame them, right? But this is, China's placed restrictions on international, so this can have international ripple effects, creating supply chain limitations and price increases, or even both. And on top of that, if you think about what is still happening right now, is the China zero COVID policy. And we'll go into that detail more in the future. Next slide.
All right.
Next one is military. So this is also pretty relevant now, well, actually very relevant. So when we would look at this from the Army, we would look at it, or what are the military impacts? What kind of vehicles are out there on the battlefield? How many personnel are out there? What kind of units are out there? How can that affect our military operations? Well, when looking at it from a supply chain resilience standpoint, we look at this at how current and future military operations can impact your supply chain. Big one right now, right? Russia and Ukraine war, stopping the flow of goods, increasing costs, and even starting to have product shortages all across the industries. So wars can wipe out roads, industries, and manufacturing facilities. So you need to take that into consideration when you're evaluating and gathering intelligence on your supply chain. Even from a domestic standpoint now, which people probably don't even pay attention to, is that the military has priority on orders if you're dealing in that space, right? In my aerospace manufacturing, if a military order comes in, it could knock out one of our commercial orders and maybe a Boeing order. If a military order comes in for, say, like an F-35, they're going to get top priority. So this is also something to really take into consideration. Then there's another thing, right? The Defense Production Act, which can actually, the military and the federal government can use to dictate to certain suppliers what they need to make. And this can have an impact for you if you have existing orders or future orders.
Yeah, I would offer that it's not just for parts, it's also for materials to make the parts. Yeah. So that's where they can take the metals or the plastics or the other things that you need that you were going to use to make your parts to make those other parts. And here's a slide where they talk about Ukraine. They're already doing studies across the board in these major institutions, the UN, World Bank, IMF, OECD, are projecting the effect of a military operation overseas, a major conflict, which is political and military. So being aware of this is very important. It's a supply chain professional. It's not something you can ignore. It's something you have to pay attention to and see how it affects your supply chain. The economy.
So here's another one, economic. So we're just talking about, right? So a lot of people and organizations just look at it from a profitability, stock price, look at their statement of cash flows. How's this company doing financially? And that does make sense, but there's more to it than just the financial side. So this looks at economic policies such as government spending and taxes, and about the money supply of a country, because like we're seeing right now with hyperinflation, that can all have major inflation impacts. Then there's also what economic levers governments can use to control the market. And this is one that we really need to consider, right? So these are known as trade barriers, which can include tariffs, import-export restrictions, and even import and export quotas, just like what I've been using with this semiconductor China scenario. So countries can use these levers to restrict trade, which then can raise prices and reduce the availability of a product, or even do both. So this has a direct impact on what you pay. And just like, again, with China, there's also the tariff wars when President Trump was in, and there was all this back and forth with tariffs. And that was having another major impact on supply chain, on operations and costs. Next slide. Then there's social. Another interesting one to consider, and this is another one that a lot of organizations don't consider, are what are the potential social impacts of doing business with an organization. So listening to podcasts, on YouTube, on the news, there's a lot of talk, growing talk about ESG initiatives, which it stands for environmental, social, and governance. So basically, customers and investors, so consumers, are now becoming ethically conscious. Investors and consumers now care about where their stuff comes from and how it's made, right? So for example, is the product you have or materials you have used with slave labor? Was it made with child labor? So these customers are now, and consumers are voting with their dollars. Customers are demanding now that organizations act responsibly, and people are starting to put their money where their values are. Imagine you have bad publicity, you lose customers because you didn't take the time to map out your supply chain and figure out where exactly and how your stuff is getting to you. Bad publicity can destroy profits.
That's that third or fourth tier supplier down the road that you're not even paying attention. You're just getting an order from somebody else, a distributor who's getting an order from that supplier who may not be aligned with the values of your customers. And all of a sudden that comes to light. And then they start to look at the big dog instead of the little dog and say, hey, how can we hurt the big dog? So being aware of this is very, very important. And that leads us to infrastructure. Yep,
definitely. So this one is logistically important, right? Think about the infrastructure of that country or area that you're analyzing. You can make stuff, but without logistics, you can't move it, right? Your supplier could be making all the stuff, and if there's no way to get it to you or get it to the next node in the supply chain, it's like it wasn't even made. But on top of that, you need to consider how the infrastructure has impacts on fuel costs and the cost of your product. Because if you think about it, the cost of fuel is still going up, especially here in California and other parts of the country, but especially here, I feel it when I go to the gas pump. And it's reflected in the total product cost. You think about it from an egg standpoint, right? You look at, you're not paying for the cost of the chicken. Majority of the cost, believe it or not, comes from the transportation and fuel costs, the movement cost of getting that egg over to other parts and then to the final consumer, the total cost of ownership.
And when you have a son like mine who's eating 5 eggs at a time, that's important to know.
Yeah, definitely. Next
Information.
slide. So this is a big one too, information. People also don't realize that supply chains move not only products, but they also move information. There's two variables to think about here for information. Look at not only the reliability of the communication network, because you want to make sure that you can get a hold of your suppliers or anyone in your supply chain if you need to, but also how that information is protected. And this is even more concerning nowadays, right? Actually, the federal government even has federal regulations that now require a certain level of information security, because they're starting to realize the importance of having a secure network. And there's also a substantial increase in hacking all over the world, as we keep hearing on the news as well. And if you think about it,
yeah, as we mentioned, hackers aren't looking at the big ones who can afford cybersecurity. They're going after the small suppliers and going in through not even the back door anymore. They're coming up from underneath the house to find information through those small suppliers. So being aware of where your information is and making your suppliers are secure is very, very important.
Yeah, definitely. If you think about it, bad information can lead to bad, misinformed decisions. You're a supplier, you need a part or material, anything like that, or they say, yeah, we got 10 of those pieces in stock. They go to pull it, and there's only 2. Now you're stuck scrambling for a solution and potential upset customers. So consider those things as well.
So here's some of the the big issues with cybersecurity and cloud. Everyone put everything in the cloud. They got phishing, account compromise, ransomware, all these different things. Think about the accuracy of your information, as Howard just mentioned. Your system says you have 10, but you actually have 2. Your information is not accurate. Why? Did a hacker go in and just change your inventory levels? That's a possibility. So you want to be aware of that. Make sure your systems are secure. Physical environment.
So here's another one, physical environment. This looks at the local weather characteristics of that area. So what specific natural disasters is an area prone to? Example here again in California, besides the high gas prices, we also have wildfires and earthquakes. And also what just happened, unfortunately, a couple of weeks ago in Florida with Hurricane Ian, destroying parts of southern Florida. Definitely not a good thing. But, also think about the impacts of global warming and how the impacts it has on your weather. For example, right, say you have suppliers all in the Northeast, a big snowstorm comes, which happens at times, and it knocks out all the infrastructure, things shut down for a while, for even just a couple of weeks in the Northeast. Are you prepared for that? One thing you could do is have geographically dispersed supply chain. So for issues like that, if the snowstorm hits the Northeast, your Western suppliers or your out-of-country suppliers can help out and help pick up the pace. So making sure you're diverse. Next question. Next slide.
Time. Here we go.
And here's the
everything takes time.
So here's one. There's 2 things to consider too about time. First is the perception of time and sense of urgency. So I'm actually from Ever Beach, Hawaii, which is in Honolulu, an island of Oahu, and I'm always on Hawaiian time, right? You always heard about Hawaiian time. Time is just a suggestion. You say, be there at 4, maybe I'll show up at 7 or 8, right? But in New York, you got the New York minute, right? That sense of urgency, there's definitely different. So also consider that, right? When you're dealing with suppliers or you're looking at your supply chain or anything down on your supply chain, right? You want to make sure that serves your needs and your stakeholders' needs. Then the most important one is everything takes time, like Dr. Randy was saying, right? It takes time to gather information, to gather intelligence about your supply chain. It takes time to make a plan, and also takes time to make a decision. So you need to consider that, backwards plan for that, right? Make sure that you have ample time to do things. And like we were saying at the beginning, make sure that you look at all of these things holistically. Look at all 8 elements of this together. Like we did in the military, we made sure that we looked at everything together. And if we need to make any kind of decisions or pivot with our plans, at least we were covered in all of these 8 different parts or different elements. So it definitely helps with your supply chain resilience. Look at everything, take the time to look at everything all together and make good decisions.
And that's one of the reasons we did this webinar. Go ahead, Howard.
I was going to say too, and we talk more about this later, like Dr. Randy was saying. In this portion, we're talking about what information, what intelligence to gather, and later on we'll discuss how to get that all together and implement into a supply chain resilience plan.
As I mentioned, everything takes time. And one of the reasons to do this webinar, to do some of the following webinars we're going to have, is to reduce your time trying to figure this stuff out. We want to lay it out for you in a simple way, and you can take it for action right now. You can find out what elements, what kind of information are you looking at on a daily basis, on a weekly basis, on a monthly basis? What elements of the 8 are you missing? Politics is something that's, something I didn't pay attention to till I started to, think about supply chain and start looking at the global economic world and how something in the other side of the world can affect me here in the United States. So we got to look all the different 8 elements and see what you're missing. Where would you find this information? Like, how do you gather political information? Is the news the right place to go? Or there's some other sources that you need to go to make sure you get accurate political information? And then where are you going to fill your gaps in the next 3 days? So here's our bonus part of the presentation tonight. I know we're about 5 minutes over, so if you need to go, don't worry, we have the replay, but we're going to go ahead and get into some of the bonuses here and how to hire the right person. And then we'll give you some follow-on workshops after this. When you think about hiring the right person, you got to look at your job description. What do you need that person to do? What kind of person, type of person that needs to fill that job? Profiling the person, and then you find that person the right way. So when it comes to a supply chain intelligence analyst, this person needs to be serious, diligent, and reserved. So Howard, when you think about this kind of person, what do you think he looks like? This is where I get
Kind
to
of
put
like
on
you.
my glasses. Yeah, right. When I put on my glasses. Yeah, this is me, right? So, but yeah, it's not the 007 of supply chain management. It's not the guy that's out there driving the cars and doing the things 007 does. Instead, it's the guy that's serious and really understands the business really well. So he has to be a supply chain expert, and more importantly, how to put that information together. So you're looking for somebody that's maybe a specialist, a controller, or a guardian. How do you find that person? Well, you use a system we use in supply chain management.jobs, which is predictive index that actually profiles people. We go through, we look at your job description, we break it down to the kind of person you need. And actually on the 8th of November at 1 p.m., you can go ahead and register for that. And we'll send this information out after the webinar as well. And I'm going to show you exactly how to do this, how to take a job description, break it down, identify the profile you want in there, and then find that person quickly so you can fill that gap as fast as you need to. And it's a system. So it's something, again, a process that you can do right now. I'll be doing that on November 8th. As well as we have a supply chain resilience workshop. This is just a little bit of the information we're going to include in supply chain resilience workshop. We'll be announcing it shortly. So if you want to be on the early bird list to be able to get special deals and discounts and other cool things that we're going to be offering in this workshop, go ahead and get on the wait list. And then as we start to put more information together, get it out there, let you know the dates and locations, we'll get that to you first so you can go ahead and start making plans and make sure you're part of that conference coming up. And then next month, we're going to have a follow-on webinar to this one where we take the information we're gathering right now, we're going to start to analyze it, put it together, and make decisions with it. We're going to put all this together. Again, I'm going to send all these links out. It'll be in the replay that you'll be able to see a little bit later. It'll be something you can click and go ahead and add your name to the list. So go ahead and start thinking about questions. So you can write those down, put them in the Q&A, as well as start to think about our sponsors, supplychainmanagement.jobs. Just go to https://www.supplychainmanagement.jobs. If you're an employer, that's where you can post your supply chain jobs and get it out in front of all the right people. If you're a supply chain professional, this is where you can post your resume and be found by people looking specifically for supply chain professionals. And we are building this out, so it's the #1 platform for you to find your candidates as well as find your opportunities at supplychain.jobs. Any questions that anyone might have? Not too bad, Howard. Only 8 minutes over. All right. So again, if you have any questions, go ahead and click down the question. Go ahead and type those in. Again, I know it's late. We're a little bit late. We're a little bit over time. So if you need to go, we understand. We appreciate that. Thank you. Thank you again. If we did such a great job, we'll take that as well, and we can have questions on there. Is there a way to get a copy of the slides? What you have to do is you have to attend the workshop next year, and not only going to get some of the slides, you're going to get the workshop and all that other good stuff involved in the workshop coming up. But go ahead and just fill that in. We don't like to give away slides because people take them and then they don't come back anymore. So we make sure that we're here to answer your questions. But as far as giving away the slides, we just don't do that right now. So best just come to workshop. We're going to get all kinds of cool stuff and just get on that list. That way we make sure that it's good to go. All right. Thank you, Nancy. Appreciate it. Glad everyone had a good time and enjoyed the webinar. We're about 1 minute for being 10 minutes over, and we don't want to punish the punctual. So if you liked it, go ahead and give us a hand clap. I definitely like that. That's pretty cool. I like that too.
Thank
All
you,
right, one more
everyone.
question. Thanks, Mary. Appreciate it. Great job. All right. With
People
that,
raising hands.
outstanding. Glad. Make sure you sign up for next month's webinar. I will be sending out an email with all those links I went through really quick because I just wanted to keep on time. And that way you can go ahead and register, get on those lists, and join us for our next webinar in a couple weeks, as well as at the end of the month. We want to get that in right before Thanksgiving. With that,
Hey, Randy, I think somebody's raising their hand.
Yeah, they did. Who's raising their hand?
Oh, not anymore.
They have a question to answer. So, no worries. Good deal. All right. With that, have a good evening, everyone, and we'll talk to you later. Bye-bye.
Bye.